Hello, how are you? I'm Art Gottlieb, and I'm doing another YouTube video today on the subject of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the stages of grief, and the coronavirus. Now, this is June 14th, 2020, Sunday, and one of the positive things about the quarantine, since we're now in the 14th week, the 14th week of the actual shutdown. I just made a nice breakfast, and it turns out that I've actually had a little more time with my family during the coronavirus lockdown. So, trying to make lemonade out of lemons here. I mean, that actually has been a very positive thing. Normally, my wife and I are so busy working that we pass each other in the hallway, and we've actually spent a decent amount of quality time together. So, my point to you today is I want to take a theory that was based on a book by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and that was a book that came out in 1969, where Miss Kubler-Ross had made these observations of people who were at end of life stages, near death, and dying, actively dying. And she penned a book on death and dying in 1969, that there were five stages that she noticed that people went through during this process. And it's a good model, even though some people, of course, today find such things a little bit obsolete because they're not scientific enough. But I still find it to be a very, very useful model as far as people going through different stages of when they're in a state of loss. Now, for me, I apply it to a lot of different things. I mean, somebody doesn't have to be actively dying or seeing somebody who's actively dying to go through these five stages of grief or loss. It could be a number of things that have to do with life in general. And that's why I'm applying it to the coronavirus shutdown and lockdown. And you'll see what I mean as we get into it. So, the five stages, as you're probably aware, and I have a note over here, and that's why I keep darting my eyes over a little bit. So please forgive me for that. Denial, bargaining, anger, depression, and then acceptance. And I've had many people actually tell me that the acceptance is a tough nut to crack, right, as you might imagine. So think about the things that during the coronavirus lockdown that people may have lost, if you think about your own experience of it. And of course, this is going to depend on whether or not what stage of life you're in, right? Now, for me, for instance, I'm still actively in a career. So, my vocation, my career is something that has been deeply affected, of course, by the shutdown. And everybody must know somebody, either as a family member or an acquaintance by this point, where you know somebody who's been deeply affected, perhaps lost their job permanently, laid off, maybe temporarily, had to go through their savings, etc. Now, these are all things that will affect people's ability to their state of mind, obviously. I mean, that's an understatement, isn't it? So, when you're losing something, my thesis to you today is that Kubler-Ross's stages of grief actually apply. And I know they have for me. I mean, I gave this whole thing, let's see, we started on March 9th. As far as March 9th is the week where I wasn't doing my normal presentations. If you know me, I'm doing 40 presentations a month, and I'm all over the place, driving in the car. I have a very industrious kind of a very ambitious schedule where I'm running from one place to the next and then speaking into sometimes rather large audiences. So for me, this was a tremendous, dramatic change to be idling. I'm not good at idling. I'm good at, you know, building stuff. So that was an emotional adaptation that I had to make. And you can see, I'll use myself as an example just for the sake of using that as a template for things that may be occurring to you or people that you know. There was a lot of different mental adjustments I needed to make. And this has been something unprecedented. Of course, I don't know if you ever remember something like the coronavirus shutdown, where the economy was artificially induced into a sort of a medical coma, if you will, for the sake of the entire organism, right? It implies a certain level of sacrifice for the greater good. And then of course, then you have people who were more affected and those who were less affected, right? If you're somebody who's drawing a complete salary during this entire time, that may be one thing. And if you're somebody who's lost their entire income during this whole thing, that may be yet another thing altogether. So let's look at this. Once again, I'm darting up to my note. I wrote a list of things that, at least from my own standpoint, I found to be losses. Loss of social contact. Loss of seeing, use me for an example once again, just as an example overall. I mean, if you're somebody who's come to the senior center, Westport, all the time, I mean, I'm sure that you must miss seeing everybody. There were times where I used to come and just do work there, just because I like being around the people at the center, right? Seeing people up in Sue's Cafe and how are you? Yeah, nice day, and all the rest of that. People coming out from yoga. I miss all of that. I really do. So there's that. And I miss my interaction with the audience. There is doing a lot of Zoom videos now, and obviously this is a YouTube video. And even though I'm coming acclimated to it, I miss the interaction with the actual live audience. Okay, seeing the look on people's faces, they agree, they don't agree, they want to kill me, all of that's good for me. You know me. So, another thing is the loss of visitation. Many of the people I'm working with, I mean, I still have my private clients that I've been seeing via either telemedicine, or I opened my private office again this week, so I started seeing clients in person. Of course, we're wearing masks and cleaning our hands all the time, but that's okay. It's good to see people, and it's good for them too, so they say to me. And a lot of people's problems, and I happen to be in the same situation actually. My parents are back in from Florida, and they're just, I know them, and I've seen videos of them that my brother's taken, and they're just not practicing proper protocol and hygiene and all the rest of that. And my wife and I, my wife works at Greenwich Hospital, and the two of us have been trying to be remarkably good, especially for me. It's more of an effort. She's used to working in a sterile environment. Trying to make sure that we aren't getting infected with this thing. And I'm not going to go down and see my folks right now because, well, I don't want to either infect them, or I don't want them infecting me and then coming back and infecting my wife. And I tell you these stories, once again, not just as a story about myself, but I know that a lot of people are feeling the same thing. There's a responsibility about, I don't want to get somebody else sick, right? My parents are elderly people. They're 92 and 92 and a half years old, right? So they're obviously in a vulnerable age group, as you know. Right? So these are things that have never really come up in this regard before, and it brings up other feelings of, well, what happens if somebody gets sick, or what happens if somebody passes? I've worked with folks right now who have had to essentially stand idly by while their parent passed away in another part of the hospital because they weren't able to go in because of the coronavirus rules and restrictions. So these are unprecedented things. Unprecedented things. So social contact rather, seeing people every day, working with people every day, loss of visitation, which is one I just used in my example, loss of money, loss of income. So for many people, depending on who you are and how you feel about things, or perhaps your age or your politics, I suppose, even, many people in this country, myself included, are, kind of a little capitalistic. I like to, from the standpoint entrepreneurial, I'm proud of the fact that I earn money and that I'm paying my bills and that I own nice things, right? So all of those things go away all of a sudden. Not the things, but the ability to pay for those things. Your ability to actually earn a living taken away from you by the artificial shutdown, if you're self-employed, that is. And you go into Kubler-Ross's stages of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. In this particular case, I could say that all of those things I visited, like boom, 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 boom. And this is dating myself from my standpoint of sociology, but, as a man, I found it humiliating to have to dive into savings and lose my sense of control, okay? I'm not embarrassed about telling you that. I'm 62 years old, and I was raised and reared in a different time by today's standards, a pack of ravenous wolves. So the things that I always prided myself on right now are kind of like been strangely unavailable to me, and it's left me with, a little bewildered and without a sense of identity. I mean, fortunately for me, I've got a lot of stuff to do, and I have opportunities, etc., which is something else we'll talk about. Those who actually have opportunities and who don't, which you might actually call class differences, right? Those who have finished their working careers and are in a state of retirement, well, this whole thing might be affecting them differently because they didn't lose their sense of income because they weren't earning an income because they were in retirement. Yet that doesn't mean that people aren't anxious about it, because many people I know, of course, they have grandchildren, they have children, and they're worried about them. What do you think? If you have any ideas about this, or you have any feelings of your own, or you're depressed, or you're sad, I hope that you'll pick up the telephone and call somebody or speak to somebody. I've received some very nice emails about some of the other YouTube videos that I've done, which is another reason why I'm doing one on what I'll refer to as wellness right now, because it seems to be well received during a time where I feel like people are pretty anxious. So in this particular case today, instead of just doing a history presentation on something, relatively unrelated, or something political, because I don't really want to add to anybody's anxiety level, it's time for a little bit of compassion, some discussion, some understanding. And if you have any thoughts, if you want to shoot me an email at agott@optonline.net, I invite you to do so. And I hope that you're all doing well, and that I look forward to seeing you soon. Once again, Art Gottlieb. Take care.